Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we've got a really interesting show today because we're going to be talking about widowhood and life after the loss of a spouse. And my spouse died, your dad, 4 years ago, and I've certainly learned a lot since he died. And I know if you've had a loss, this show is really going to help you out.
Exactly, Mom. It is a show definitely near and dear to my heart because, like you said, you found love after loss. Dad died in 2020. I want to give a shout out for your book. So it's called Open to Love, The Secrets of Senior Dating. And yeah, Dad died, and I thought, okay, my mom is going to be a widow. That's her new role forever and her identity. And lo and behold, you found a guy.
I know. I was going to write a book for widows, and I decided to have a chapter on online dating. And lo and behold, I met Dr. Frank Powers, who's another psychologist, and I said to him, "Oh, Frank, I've learned so much about dating with you and also about widowhood. Let's write a book together, Open to Love, The Secrets of Senior Dating." And I want to tell you, we've got a lot of tips and tools in there. I talk about my family and some of the ups and downs we had getting into a relationship. So I think you're going to enjoy it. It's a good read, and you can buy it on Amazon. And if you like it, or if you don't like it, give us some feedback on Amazon.
So go get the book, Open to Love. Okay, Mom. I'm going to introduce both of our guests because they know a little bit about that also. They know about losing a spouse, and they also know about finding love again. So they are Dr. Jill Harrington, who's been on our show before. Hey, Jill.
Hi.
Good to have you back. And Dr. Eric Brewer.
Yes, my pleasure to be here.
Very
Awesome.
nice to have you on as well. And Jill introduced us to Eric at the Association for Death Educators and Counselors. We partner with them, and you made that introduction, and we're so happy to have you today.
Likewise.
Absolutely. You know, it's been an interesting trip for me, having a spouse die just 4 years ago. So I'm going to be interested in the take of a longer grief, because your husband died a lot of years ago, right?
Almost 20, yeah.
Yeah. And your wife just died the same year Phil did.
2020, yes, 4
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mom, let me quickly introduce them. Dr. Jill Harrington is an assistant professor of social work at Marymount University. She was widowed after her husband died, leaving her to raise 2 young children. Andrew was on a military duty assignment and died suddenly. Jill has a private practice in Washington, D.C. She has a fiance named David Carey, who is wonderful. She is on the advisory boards of the Hospice Foundation of America Autism and Grief Program and the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, which you and I are on with her. She is the creator and lead editor of the book, Superhero Grief, The Transformative Power of Loss. And Mom, I know you have a chapter in that as well.
Yeah.
So welcome, Jill.
And Dr. Brewer has a chapter in the upcoming second edition of the series.
I love it. So you have another book with the same name.
It's going to be focusing on non-death loss, but similar name.
Non-death loss with a similar name. Wonderful. So Dr. Eric Brewer,
Yes.
founder and senior pastor of Transformed Church Global Ministries, COVID-19 survivor and widower after his wife Holly died of COVID.
Yes.
He is now remarried to Tiffany Williams, who Jill said is a rock star. So you both married rock. You all are involved with rock stars. We got the fiance, and we got the spouse, the wife.
Yes.
You're going to have someone on here who actually has a rock star for a partner?
I love it. We got to get all your partners on. That's what I'm saying.
Ours are real rock stars.
That's what I want to hear about.
Yes.
So after Holly died, you remarried Tiffany Williams,
Yes.
as we've said, and your doctoral dissertation was entitled Healing Hidden Wounds, the Resilience of Black Men and the Impact of Their Spirituality Upon Their Grief Recovery.
Yes.
And Eric, you founded and leads a national weekly support group for Black widowers.
Yes.
Okay, welcome to our show.
And I must say, he also has a Sunday service that's great online. So if you want to go online and
Thank
taste the little Sunday service, it's you get a little spirituality there. It's a great way to do it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I was just thinking about this show, and Jill, you've been widowed for how many years?
17 and a half, almost 18.
And you were a young widow. How old were you?
36 years old.
36,
Yeah.
yeah.
With
And
young children.
Eric, you just 4 years,
4 years ago.
and you were married for how long?
21 years.
And how old are you, just do you mind?
Right now I'm 52, so I was 48 at the time.
48.
Yes.
You know, it's kind of interesting because I was looking at the literature, and most women are widowed if you're, the average age of widowhood, surprising to a lot of people, is 58
For women.
for women and 67 for men.
Yes.
So it's a good 10 years longer that men may have a wife who passes away than it is for women. So actually, both of you are fairly young in widowhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Majority of people in the United States die over the age of 55 without
Yeah.
gender, or biological sex accounting
Yeah.
for it. So
Yeah.
so young widowhood.
Yeah.
It has a different, I think, sometimes, I used to run a group called Common Grounds for widows and widowers. And, there's issues across the developmental spectrum.
Yeah.
And that, I think, age and where you are on that spectrum can influence your grief. But there's a lot of common ground between widowed and widowed persons.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you, because I know there are people watching the show who are really newly widowed, and they are looking at us, and as Heidi said, we've all kind of met up with somebody, and they are like, whoa, I'm just into the first few months or whatever, and
Yes.
I would never think of remarrying again or redating again or connecting up again. But tell us just how you felt over time. I mean, do you remember, Jill, how you felt over time?
Yeah, I think that's a very common feeling, especially when, and it depends also on like the nature of your relationship. Some people who've been experiencing a long-term illness with somebody, I could speak from a client perspective, long-term illness with somebody, there's kind of the death before the death, so there's like a double loss. So sometimes people are a little bit more ready. I always say to folks that, your readiness is kind of up to you. I know for me, I felt like I had other priorities going on. I had 2 young children. I think there's a lot of fear. How am I going to navigate this life? How am I going to navigate, because your kind of future hopes and dreams, those secondary losses, the dream of the family, the dream of the things you planned for, everything kind of comes into question. And so certainly for me, those first month or even year, it was more about trying to navigate, 2 children, one with special needs. I think that, but it's a normal feeling to feel like, wow, I'm in this world, and when you lose a partner, whether you're married or committed to each other, a partner, that is that person that you're kind of going through life with.
Right.
So the 2 halves of that whole it's kind of gone, and you're not making decisions also together as a couple. So I think that it's really normal to fear that, but I also think the question comes up a lot in groups, especially when I think people who are newly bereaved see folks like us some years later having met and repartnered. And I often tell people, like, take some time.
Yeah.
Take some time.
Well, Eric, how about you? What's the male point of view on this situation? Because I know from the literature that males tend to connect up with 7 months.
Yes,
yes.
Men do not stay single or in widowhood long. For me, I did not see it coming. And the reality is, when COVID came, North Jersey, Hackensack, where I pastored, it was ground zero. And the very first patient at Hackensack Hospital comes in, my member's at the desk, and then comes to church and hug us all that evening. And I get a phone call the next day that I've been exposed to COVID. And I was like, what is COVID?
Wow.
And of course, she came back, the report was negative. And I was like, okay, great. I don't have to say anything. I dodged a bullet, because I was like, how do you tell a congregation that we've been exposed to this disease, this pandemic? At that time, we even know it was a pandemic. But eventually, because of being in the location of Hackensack, it spread, and I came down, my wife came down, and she passed. So my late wife died unexpectedly. It was sudden, so it was no preparation.
You said at one point before the show you thought she was going to make it. And
Absolutely.
She was in the hospital, you thought she was going to be okay.
Absolutely. So my wife for 21 years, I'm sitting there trying to, what is going on? And she was on a respirator for 10 days in a coma.
Wow.
It shot her sugar up to 994. So they actually put her in a coma And she came off, got off the respirator, came out the coma, was sitting up in bed, and they said she'll be home in 4 days. And that was on that Sunday. We had a FaceTime. My daughter talked to her. And that Tuesday morning, April 21st.
Was your daughter able to go into the hospital at all?
No, we were not. We were not able to see her. So when the ambulance came and picked her up from the home, that was the last time. And even when I was sick and I was battling with COVID, and I thought one night I was going to die, and I went to the hospital and I said, I have COVID, but I was not sick enough. They was overwhelmed with so many patients, and to see the refrigerator trucks in the back of the hospital was terrible.
Yeah.
And so even that whole process, and you know, being a clergy person, being a pastor, I've been with the company a long time. I've been in ministry for 30 years, and I was like, why is this happening to me? And it challenged my faith, of course, and even though it caught me by surprise, I believe that it did not catch the Creator by surprise. And my pain was, for some reason, it connected me to other men who have lost their wives or losing their wives. All of a sudden was calling me for advice, and I'm hurting just like them.
Right.
And I just started talking to them, and I formed this widower support group. And so people ask, how did you were able to fall in love again? First of all, I said I made it a focus that I'm going to live. And
or you have to, your body's saying, I'm going to live. I mean, that's the question when you have a big loss.
Yes.
I always say the first big loss, it could be loss of a child, it could be a loss of a parent or whatever, that the first loss that knocks you down on the ground is the one where you realize, I'm going to live, you know, when you realize.
Or you make the commitment. I've got to take care of myself.
Because your body thinks it's going to die.
You all, I'm thinking about, okay, when Scott died, my brother at 17, when your spouses died, you all had children.
Yes.
I mean, my sister was 14, I was 20, and my other sister was 19. What, your daughter was 18, and your kids were 6 and 10?
Yeah, 6 and 10.
You all had children, so it's like, okay, wait, I'm grieving, but I need to take care of myself because I have children that depend on me.
Well, you're fighting for life.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Really.
You are.
Your life.
Yeah, you're there's surviving, and then there's kind of thriving, if you
Right.
can.
Yeah.
But it's that seismic kind of loss that kind of cracks you open.
Right.
Yes.
And then I think there is, and sometimes people, you know, you're pulling to survive, right? So then as you're doing that, and if you can, and some people, it doesn't, you know.
Right.
So as you're trying to think about how is my life now going to be impacted, and and how am I going to move forward at some point? And if you're open to, I think, the energy of having somebody else with you, it's hard to navigate.
Right.
Yeah, I kind of think about when you get that hug, if you really connected with somebody, it's almost like plugging in your cell phone.
Right, right.
Well, and also initially I would think it would be an identity loss. Who am I now?
Yes.
I had this idea of what my life was going to look like. Who am I now without my spouse?
Right.
Who am I now as a parent? It's all on me. Who am I now in just navigating the world?
And that's a very key point, is being able to start a new chapter in your life. Because I had all these plans of retirement and doing great things, but finally we had empty nesters, and all of a sudden, you know, the pandemic happened while my daughter was a freshman at Drew University.
Yeah.
And so my life changed in a blink.
There you're
just
by
like that.
yourself in the house.
Yes. And that was like, wow. And so grief is universal, and everyone processes grief at different levels, at different speeds. And so the reality is I'm in this big home, empty bed, you know, I put all the pillows on the side, tell the Willers, put all the pillows so you can sleep. Yeah, so I was home alone, and I had to deal with the reality that my wife is not coming back. And well, other people were trying to put their grief on me, and as a pastor and as a clergy person, I took a sabbatical, of course, from ministry so I can heal. And my phone was ringing with so many losses, and I was doing funerals of other folks because I had people in the congregation who were passing, as well as...
That's pretty surreal. I mean, both of you are professionals, so to be dealing with your own grief
Yes.
and also having to be heading up these funerals and everything, be in charge of all that.
Yes.
You're like, I taught at the University of Rochester Grief and Loss, and it's like I've been teaching this, dealing with it. Now it happens to me, and it's like, whoa, baby, I
Absolutely.
had no idea
Absolutely.
that it would take. But I want to say one thing about grief. We intellectually talk about it, but it's so much in the body. I just don't think
Absolutely.
people realize how much it is in your body. Your body is going to go through something, and you can't necessarily control it.
Well, when you have a deep attachment to somebody, because we know grief is a form of love, we don't often talk about that, sudden withdrawal, if you want to say, because love kind of is part of our pleasure centers.
Right.
Love kind of kicks up our, and there is this not just physical, basically barring of being with the person. There's also the emotional. It's very stark and very painful because we just don't really take into account, almost like withdrawing from something. Like it could be, love could be a drug in a way, but
Exactly.
it's a normal part of who we are. And
Cortisol,
so
yeah.
we've learned our whole lives. We're taught from when we're little, right, to attach, to survive, and love is a beautiful thing, and family is love, and relationships are love.
Right.
But we're never really taught how to, in a way, really grieve and be forced to detach from somebody.
One of the things that I've noticed with young widows, and I don't know if it's with widowers or the same, but they do have their children. The older widows don't have anybody at home with them. They have an empty house oftentimes. And even though it is really hard to have kids there, you can hold them. You can have some physical contact with another human being, whereas older widows do not oftentimes have that opportunity. And I was wondering with guys, is it the same way? Because I know guys have a whole different program. I mean, they got to figure out how to put bows in their kids' hair and how to read stories to them or whatever the wife's role was.
Yes, and
what
because
about
people are
guys?
habitual, so you take the wife out of now this family unit, and now this father becomes now a single father. A husband becomes now a single father, and he has to learn how to take care of the children. He has to now manage the home. And a lot of those duties, not to get caught in gender roles, the wife was so supportive, was there. And the reality is now we have working mothers who have passed.
Right.
And now there's a financial burden. So what I'm discovering with widowers is they have to take care of the family. They have to, of course, the finances. And if the wife did cooking, did everything, handling finances, a lot of these men are lost. They don't even know how to cook for themselves. They don't even know how to do the bills. And so it's more than just helping them with the grief. It's the everyday realities that they have to now face. And the reality is they don't have the time to grieve. So I have men who come to the group whose wife has passed over 2 years ago, and they just volcano and boo-hoo and cry because they've been keeping it together, trying to be strong for the family and trying to be strong for everybody else, yet to not have grieved within their own hearts and to cry and to emote. And the reality is most men don't know how to grieve properly or correctly. And so I'm trying to really help those men not to fall into the negative distractions, the self-destructive vices to help them, get through their grief.
Do you
Added
think
that.
men get involved in relationships too quickly because of that?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense, if they're looking for a crutch, they're looking for a 2.0 of their wife, absolutely. But if they have, talking about attachment, if they have made a healthy detachment from the past and with a mindset of starting a new chapter with a new wife, a new spouse, then they can move forward, not just move on, but they're intentional in moving forward with their lives and say, the person I'm dating, the person I'm with, I want to start a new chapter.
And when I talk about detachment, I don't mean that you completely close
Absolutely.
out.
Right.
It's really, I think it's an integration. It's an integration of learning how to, in a way, you're physically detached, but it's that emotional kind of connection, that you still have that enduring bond
Absolutely.
of love, and how do you kind of integrate that? And I think it takes a special kind of person to be with someone who's lost a partner,
Yes.
or someone that they've been married to.
Ooh, that's a good point. The person you get involved with needs to have that ability.
They do, absolutely.
Absolutely.
There were people when I began dating that would have been, and again, I was not a single parent, I was an only parent. And I want to differentiate that, because a lot of times people are like, oh, you're a single parent. That kind of denotes that there's another person in the picture.
Right. I like
think
that.
people who have been widowed persons with children we're only parents. So
a good point.
we don't get the opportunity maybe to, and I'm not degrading this, I come from divorced parents, but you know, I didn't have another person who was helping me co-parent. And only parents can come in many different forms of loss. But as a widowed person, I was an only parent. And when I started dating, there were also people who might have been good for me if I didn't have children, but they weren't necessarily people good for me because I had children. So there's a lot of like different variables that come into
So
play.
it's not just when you're ready to date, it's also when you are ready, you gotta find that other person
Right.
that can handle your situation.
And I would also think you have to find somebody that's okay with your children, or you maybe talking or remembering the person that died.
Especially early on.
That was very important to me.
Okay.
And that's why, you know, my partner, my fiance, we're going to be married next year, David, was so special, our relationship, but it took a while. But I remember in the first months of dating, I didn't introduce him to my children until about 6 to 9 months, because I wanted to make sure that I was on solid footing, because it's hard, because that's also a risk you take as a parent,
Yes.
is that your child becoming attached to somebody, especially after they've had a significant loss. And then if the relationship doesn't work out, you are exposing and a lot of times people won't date because of that, because they don't want to expose their children to that, especially if the kids have had a very profound loss of a
Right.
parent. But I still remember us going to a football game, and it was a football game of my late husband's alma mater, and his classmates, I had said, would it be okay if I bring somebody? And they're like, absolutely, Jill. So the kind of approval from the group of guys that were his friends, like, of course. And then I still remember I brought my daughter, and there were these foam hats that they had made at the football game, and she had really wanted one. And I kind of felt like David was that special guy, because he went around and collected pieces without us knowing of all the different parts of a hat to put together this foam hat of a ship. And he came back and he gave it to her. And I was like, wow, that is really, really special. And to this day, he's been part of their lives for a long time. My kids, well, we call them our kids all now, we're a blended family, but when they have an issue, they call him first.
Yes.
And how about you, Eric?
So what's interesting in my situation, my daughter says to me, Dad, I want to go to law school. And I said, I know this Judge Tiffany. Her parents are pastors, and her mother was on this pastors' wives group together. And I said, call this Judge Tiffany. I reach out to her mother, and I get the number. My daughter talks to Tiffany first. And she said, Dad, she's a nice woman. And so I called Tiffany just to thank her for talking to my daughter. And she says, you don't remember me. You took me on a date 30 years ago,
What?
and you ghosted me. You never called me back. So I said, guess what? I'm calling you back right now. So
There
what
you
was supposed
go.
to be a 5-minute conversation ended up being 9 hours.
Wow.
Wow.
And after that, I knew that conversation, she was the one.
Wow, that
And-
was fast.
And so
Yeah,
it was
I love it.
interesting. It was, of course, rough shores, rough seas initially, but they find
You do have to work out
Yes.
a lot of things.
Yes.
Well, I have to say something. There's one thing we all have in common, Heidi. We all play golf.
yes,
I try to play golf, okay?
Yeah,
You two
me
play
too.
golf.
Yeah.
And these two met golfing, and
At their golf
a
club.
date I had before I met Frank was a golfer, and that's how I got started in the dating world, was golfing with him. His wife died 2 days after Phil, and we went out and started golfing together, but I met my ultimate partner online. So I'm thinking, you know, if you're interested in a new relationship, get out there, call people, you know, connect, you know.
right.
I think though you have to, like, as the therapist in me will say that, you know, again, widowed persons, okay, people who have lost a partner or a spouse, are the most judged. For me, I really had to kind of allow myself time and space to get to have a relationship with myself, to get to know myself. I'd always sort of been in relationships. I had like 2 or 3 serious boyfriends and then got married. And so I had never really spent a lot of time in my own singledom before getting married. So it was important for me to kind of get to know myself, get to think about who I was, reconstruct myself before I went out, kind of, and assessing whether I was ready. There's readiness to go date again. I mean, let's talk about this. When you fall in love again, if you allow yourself to fall in love again, for me, there was a huge fear of loss again.
Yes.
Because you know what it feels like.
You're taking a risk
Okay,
again.
I think that we need to wrap up in a minute.
Oh, we're going to have to wrap up right
So-
now. But I'll have to say, on counter to that, ready, get, set, go. I dated very early.
She did.
I knew who I was at 80, and I got into a relationship, and I wanted to. I'm not an alone person.
Right.
I don't, you know, some people like being alone or want to find out who they are or whatever.
Right.
I used to tell people, don't date for a year. I mean, don't do anything for a year. I did everything the first year.
She did.
Sold houses, I did. And I'm perfectly
She
happy.
broke all her rules.
I broke all my rules. Eric, do you want to have one last comment?
Yes. I was about to be 50s, and I was saying at 50 years old, I'm a grown man. I know what I want. I know who I am,
Yeah.
and I know what I need in life. When you're a young man, you marry what you want, but now as you're older, you marry what you need and what you want.
Yes.
And we're prepared. I have done many weddings. We're prepared for better or worse, richer or poor, sickness and health, till death do us part.
All right.
And the key word is, how do we move on after death do us part?
Absolutely.
it.
Well, thank you guys so much for being on the show today. Where can we find you, Jill?
You could find me at either superherogrief.com or drjillharrington.com.
Eric?
Pastor Eric B. I'm on Transform Church Global Ministries on YouTube website, and I'm having a book that's going to be released in the early part of 2025, From Grief to Growth.
Absolutely.
Love it.
Well, fantastic. And Heidi and I want to thank you all for being on the show. And I want to say to you, if you think you even want to date, get out there and try it.
Absolutely.
Take the risk. It's fun. Takes courage, but it's fun. And thanks again for joining us on the show today. And Heidi and I always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.